Welcome to the Libertarian Counterpoint. I'm Richard Fields. On the program today, we have Lawrence McQuillan, Senior Fellow and Director of the Center of Entrepreneurial Innovation at the Independent Institute and the author of California Dreaming, Lessons on How to Resolve America's Public Pension Crisis. Also, Lance Christensen, Senior Policy Advisor for California Senator John Morlock and a former Reason pension analyst. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You guys, I'm assuming, well, maybe you didn't. Maybe you were able to abstain. But in case you didn't, what did you think of the Democratic presidential debate earlier this week?
Well, I can't help myself. I'm kind of a political dog, so I did watch it.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that I learned much.
I did not watch it.
And you learned something.
And I don't think I would have learned much either. I mean, the problem with these are, they're not true debates. And they're just kind of sound bites for 2 hours worth of sound bites. So I don't think you really learn anything, especially with the 24-hour news cycle that we have today. You kind of know what the topics are going to be beforehand. You know what the responses are going to be. I don't think we really learn much from these.
Well, let's do the media thing. Who won? Who lost? And did anybody? Will anybody move up and down in the polls as a result?
Well, I think in watching it, Hillary Clinton, who went in with a lot of question marks about if she could sustain it amongst other candidates, where she's been beleaguered by a lot of controversy lately. I think rightly so, but she held her own. She was at least amiable and could smile through most of the stuff and was able to, lean on a lot of platitudes throughout the entire night. You had a man like Bernie Sanders who stood up and actually defended her in a few places, which was ironic.
Unusual.
The chief rival, at least at the time, and he didn't really distinguish themselves much. You have a couple former governors in the batch who are, again, have had some challenges of their own, really raising their profile, which is interesting. And you also had the vice president sit this one out, who is thinking about.
Maybe Bernie won because more people were just introduced to him. Probably a lot of people didn't know a whole lot about him, or even what state he was from.
Yeah, it's sort of it kind of reminds me of the Republican primary debate, where the only adult in the room was pretty much ignored. Jim Webb was the only guy that sounded to me like an adult, was willing to seriously address the issues. He didn't get very much time to do so. And the guy from Maryland basically came off, I thought, very poorly.
Yeah.
Hillary, I don't particularly like her, but she acquitted herself well. And Bernie Sanders is what he is, and he didn't.
No apologies. He's a socialist.
He didn't change who he was for the debate. He just did his thing, and his 20% or whatever it is of the Democratic Party is going to vote for him come hell or high water. And so who's going to win the nomination?
I predict that it won't be Hillary.
It won't be Hillary.
It won't be Hillary. I'm not sure who it's going to be, but I agree with you. Jim Webb, who's a decorated veteran who served in the Reagan administration years ago, as a former Republican at least, came out sounding the most adult. But the problem is when you have it rigged in behalf of Hillary, which has been kind of this game for the last little while, then it makes it difficult to have a real conversation or debate on the issues.
One of the issues that more or less tripped up Hillary was the issue of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and she was attacked by the other candidates who are further, I guess, to the left than she is on trade issues. I can't remember exactly whether she actually came out for or against it. I think she was against it after she was for it or something like that. I'm not really sure. But the question I have really is Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. Should libertarians be for it or be against it?
Well, I'm an economist, and I think if you surveyed most economists, they would almost universally say, international trade's a good thing.
Right.
Raises income.
But does the TPP promote international trade?
Well, it's a political document.
Yeah.
If it expands the ability for countries to trade with each other, it's a plus. The problem is, in the last minutes especially, there were so many special interest provisions carved into it, various exemptions, and that everybody at the last minute was trying to get something special for them. So I don't know if you can say if it's going to be a plus or not. I would like to just free trade, let everybody trade internationally who wants to trade.
Well, free trade
And-
can be accomplished really easily. You just say, okay, we
Absolutely.
will drop all tariffs, we will drop
Absolutely.
all import barriers, and
And-
if anybody else wants to do them, that's their problem.
And we're willing to trade with whoever wants to trade with us.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's all you need to do. You don't need a document.
That should be the document right there.
But obviously that's too easy.
Well, it's too easy for Washington. It's
Yeah.
not too easy for us. I mean, I think
Yeah.
we would agree that international trade is the right approach for lifting up people out of poverty, for better division of labor, for more efficiency. Consumer goods at a lower price leaves more money for other things that we could spend money on. It would be a win for us and a win for the countries that trade with us.
One of the things that concerns me, I haven't had a chance to read the entire 30 chapters or whatever it is of the document.
I haven't either.
And so, there might be a lot. I mean, it was just unveiled recently, just in the last few days. Or I'm not sure if the whole thing has actually been unveiled yet, but supposedly we'll have a few days to read it before Congress votes on it. But the thing that bothers me the most is the allegations that I've heard from people on the right or the libertarian side of the aisle who say that it will have a whole lot of infringements upon internet communications because of copyright protections being beefed up. Anything to that? Is there anything to worry about that on that score?
Well, I think in the modern era, if you have a Democratic president who traditionally is a little more isolationist than others, putting forth a major trade agreement when the internet has been such a net negative for those on the left in terms of openness and transparency, I think I could see that would be a barrier. I haven't seen the agreement, so I don't know, but has been a move on the left to restrict a lot of openness on the internet, and the fact that we've given away a lot of our rights as a country to a multinational group to decide about the rules of the internet, it concerns me because frankly, this is the place of liberty where it originated. There's very few countries I trust with making good rules about the internet, and I'm concerned that in the future we'll have restrictions that we wouldn't have had otherwise.
And that's why it should be subject to a document. It should be undocumented. I mean, the internet should be free, free access, free use in terms of exchange of information, and without artificial impediments put up by government. And if that's in there, I mean, that's definitely a red flag and a dangerous sign that internet is going to be manipulated by government.
Yeah,
not only in the United States, but internationally.
Supposedly, 25 or 27 of the 30 chapters are not actually about trade. They're about other stuff, environmental, labor, internet, a lot of things that have absolutely nothing to do with trade, but had to be thrown in there in order to get agreement.
Right.
Get sign off from other, either from the left in this country or from other countries being a participant. So I guess the question I have really, what it really comes down to is, should our congressmen, should Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein and the rest of them, should they vote for this or should they vote against it? Is it a net move in the direction of free trade, or is it something entirely different, a Trojan horse?
Well, I haven't read the entire
Okay.
document,
Fair
so until I would read it, I'm not sure exactly how I personally would vote on it.
Mm-hmm.
All I can say is that, again, we don't need a document for free trade. We just need to be a country that embraces free trade. And if it's a movement towards that without a whole lot of add-ons that would cause a lot of government intrusion, intervention, special privileges, things like that, if that's all in there, then I would say probably no, don't sign it.
In my experience in the sausage-making factory of Sacramento, the longer the document, the worse it is.
Yeah,
And it's a long document.
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, we had the same conversation, or I had the same conversation with other folks back in the 90s when NAFTA was being negotiated and ultimately passed. In retrospect, did NAFTA improve the trade picture between the United States, Canada, and Mexico, or did it detract from it?
I don't know if it did, and maybe it did in some marginal way. I think it's a one-way street, though. I haven't seen a lot of Mexico or Central America's economies improving dramatically because of it. Maybe they have. I don't know.
Well, Mexico's economy has actually done quite well since NAFTA was passed.
Mexico is pretty much, you still have a lot of migration north.
Well,
And if it's that great-
actually, that's turning around. In the last few years, you've had migration actually going back south again.
But again, that was driven by, I think, the Great Recession.
Yeah,
actually.
well, yeah, but the point being that it wasn't as bad in Mexico as it was in the States.
Yeah, and there's a lot of data to be reviewed over the next few years to figure out what were the causes for that both ways. I don't know. I'm always open for free trade. I think we should have as few restrictions as possible, but we have to make sure that whatever is being passed through Congress isn't laden with a whole bunch of other exceptions.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing in the news this week, another big issue, I guess, is the whole cauldron in the Middle East. President Obama has announced that he's going to continue to keep troops in Afghanistan for, I guess, the indefinite future. And in the meantime, he's been fighting an pretty much, I guess, ineffectual war against ISIS in Iraq and parts of Syria. Meanwhile, President Putin from Russia has joined the shooting war in Syria, in the Middle East. And my question is really very simple. Should we let him adopt this tar baby?
Well, the 1970s foreign policy is coming back. I don't know. It's so complex, the Middle East, and I think every time we try to get more involved, it just gets worse. It's difficult when there's a lot of people in those areas that are multi-factional, tribal sort of instincts, and you have created these massive gangs of terrorists, ISIS being the most recent, Al-Qaeda. They're just networks of mobs, basically, that are able to suck up a lot of money and continue to barbarously torture people. I don't know, it's our business to get in it right now, or if we've already gotten it too far, but having Putin there, I don't think makes the situation any better. What we do about it or not, I don't know.
Well, I mean, the reason I asked the question the way I did is the demise of the Soviet Union back in the 80s largely stemmed from their occupation of Afghanistan.
Right.
They left Afghanistan with their tail between their legs. They got whopped by a bunch of mountain men wearing turbans. Will the same thing happen if Putin tries to do too much too soon in
Well, he's
in
aligned
Syria?
himself with a dictator who's brutally murdered and killed hundreds of thousands of people in his own country. I don't know if that ends well for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. On the other
Well,
hand,
I think today, too, Secretary of State Kerry said that there's a possibility that the United States could put troops into Syria.
oh my God,
Yeah.
So he now has opened the door to,
for Soviet troops, or
starting
Russian-
first with consultants, advisors, but he didn't rule out the possibility of troops, U.S. troops into Syria.
So we could have Russian troops facing off against U.S.
Well,
troops.
yeah. I mean, the reports are now that Russia's bombing rebels that we're supporting. So how long does the United States put up with that? Since we're funding these groups, the rebel groups, and now if Russia's going to bomb them, you could have a 10-way war break out. I mean, there's so many, not because we didn't even talk about the Kurds.
Yeah.
And they're fighting with Turkey and.
Well, and the other thing about Putin is he has the quality of ruthlessness that is useful in fighting a war, but lacking in Washington, at least as far as war fighting is concerned. He stomped out the opposition in Chechnya almost totally.
Yeah, well,
immediately and totally.
Crimea.
But they went to
Ukraine,
Syria. I
yeah.
mean, there's a lot of Chechens
That's right.
now. There's a lot of Chechens fighting in Syria,
Yeah, I'm sure there probably
Yeah.
are. So I guess.
and now they'll be fighting Russia in Syria.
Oh man.
It's a mess. I don't think
It is a
there's
mess.
any sort of answer to it right now. But it's only going to escalate. And, if you get back to a Reagan sort of stance, the peace through strength perspective, that's something that our government hasn't put forward. But, with defense cuts down, with other spending priorities that have increased, I don't know what the United States foreign policy is right now.
I'm
I have no
skeptical
idea
too.
what it is.
That I mean, we can identify limited government, pro-liberty, pluralistic people to support.
Well, yeah,
So,
I mean, as I
you know,
look at
we're
the
putting
Middle
our
East-
money behind certain groups.
Yeah,
but
as I look at the Middle East-
I doubt there's very many Thomas Jeffersons and James Madisons within those factions.
Well, precisely. I mean, you've got ISIS, you've got Assad, you've got the Ayatollahs in Iran,
Right.
you've got the Shiites basically running Iraq, you've got people who have a worse human rights record than any of them running Saudi Arabia, and they've had a worse human rights record, for decades. You've got the Muslim Brotherhood back in control in Egypt. Who the hell knows who's running Libya these days? It's a mess all over the place. It is literally tar paper.
Well,
and the fact that
to assume that you can identify
people are
support.
emigrating from the Middle East to Europe en masse.
Right.
That says it all.
Right, which is perfectly understandable given the situation. But to think that you can identify from here who to support long term,
who's our friend?
is
I don't think.
it's
Right.
fantasy.
Yeah.
Well,
So if we don't have friends.
well, it's the enemy of our enemy of our enemy of our enemy of our enemy, right? I mean, it's
Well, it is.
we're getting to a place.
Okay,
where we can identify.
that the whole point is, what in the world do we have troops there for in the first place?
I think we stay
let them
away.
fight it out. Let them settle their own problems one way or another.
Let's stay away.
And trade with whoever ends up, owning the oil
And who wants to trade?
and
Yeah.
is willing to trade, right?
Right.
And that's going to be anybody. I mean, they have nothing else to sell for the most part. Oil and a few. Iran is a fairly good agricultural country, but and they're smart technically.
And Lebanon used to be a resort.
Lebanon used to be the Paris of the
Right,
Mediterranean.
Right.
So I mean, they've got the natural resources. And Jordan has some interesting places to visit.
And Syrian people are well educated. I mean, a lot of the people who are immigrating are doctors and lawyers and engineers, and so I mean they can make huge contributions to other countries.
So we all agree we can't solve it. We might as well stay home.
Yeah.
Okay. We had a very interesting selection by the Nobel Committee in Oslo. Angus Deaton won the Nobel Prize for Economics. He said, and I quote, "Life is better now than at almost any time in history." I agree with that. And I've never heard of this guy before. I'm not, it's been 40 years since I studied economics. But a lot of his work, as I understand it, consisted of reconciling economic theory with economic data. And to me, that's got to be a good thing. Did the best economist win?
Well, I didn't receive it, so
I see.
no, the best economists did not win. But to get to your other question, I mean, he's devoted his life to really trying to understand poverty by looking at how people actually spend their money and allocate their resources at a very micro level, individual level, family level. So that's a huge advantage because so many past studies, past approaches have been very macro, and the other good point about his work too, he's concluded that country to country transfers of money don't work. You just end up beefing up the government institutions at the expense of the individual. So he's very anti-foreign aid from government to government, and he's much more pro private individual, private foundations, private individuals stepping in to help, lift up impoverished
Micro-lending, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and even foundations. So I think he's arrived at some interesting conclusions that are contrary to what we've seen at the international level with the big financial organizations like the World Bank and the IMF, who like to make government-to-government transfers of multi-billion-dollar amounts. And he said, this doesn't work. This isn't the right approach. What you do is you just empower government at the expense of poor people, and it doesn't lead to long-term, sustained, self-perpetuating prosperity.
Sounds like the facts led him into anarchism.
Yeah, well, I think it's encouraging in that they did. I mean, they could have given it to worse people. Let's put it that way. So, I mean, they picked an economist who was focused on a very important issue. I mean, poverty. It's extremely important.
It sounds like he did honest, incredible work.
Yeah, he's very much into the numbers, into the data, and letting the data speak. And he picked an approach that was different than what other people were doing, which is let's look at how people are really spending their money and where are they receiving the money from, how are they spending it, is this the best way to lift people up?
It's almost like he's inspired by Mises.
To a certain extent. I don't know how much he's read them, but
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was kind of unexpected, though, because he doesn't have a large body of research like some of the recipients in the past. And a lot of people, frankly, aren't that familiar with his work.
It's interesting. We see a lot of, we saw Hayek, we saw Friedman, we saw, there's been some Buchanan, yes, some really interesting guys have won the Nobel Economics Prize, and people that we would very much agree with. And I'm just wondering if he's
well, I think the Austrian economists were hoping for Kerzner, who's done, path-breaking work on entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
And that would have been great, but again, he was passed up.
Yeah. Well, maybe next time.
Maybe next time.
Another issue that has attracted my attention over the last few years is the whole issue of the Federal Reserve System has in fighting the 2008-2009 financial crisis. They lowered interest rates essentially to zero, did 4 rounds of quantitative easing, made money really, really available at very little cost to people who don't need it. But it's very difficult for people who do need it to get it. And as a result, we have a large number of American households, according to statistics that I've come across, 7.7% of Americans' households are unbanked. They don't use banks. They're in a cash economy. 20% are underbanked, don't use banks very much. And of course, black markets and gray markets thrive on the cash economy. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve, desperately looking at another recession coming down the pipes, probably, it wants to have a tool to fight it, and it's very difficult to have a monetary tool to fight it when you're already at 0% interest rates. So they're talking about going the way that some countries in Europe have gone, which is going to negative rates. It's happened in Denmark, it's happened in Switzerland, it's happened, I think, in Germany, to combat the next economic downturn. And you've, of course, got politicians who would not like nothing better than to get rid of cash because they think that would solve all of the black market problems that they worry about. Are the stars aligned for the elimination of cash, similar to what's happened in some places in Europe?
Well, I think you're seeing a change fundamentally in how people are interacting economically with one another on a lot of levels. You've got a millennial generation that doesn't use a lot of financial services that their parents have used in the past for different reasons. A lot of crowdsourcing opportunities that go on, Bitcoin. I mean, just throw out a whole bunch of things. Your options for trading, for mutually beneficial, options, have significantly changed. And the Federal Reserve, as a quasi-governmental entity, can't keep up with some of that. Putting aside all the other issues that you stated here earlier, I think the economy as a very connected, dispersed economy is just different than it used to be. And so a lot of people, if you've got like your Airbnbs or your Ubers or whatever, where people are able to connect individually person to person, why would you need a bank to do a lot of this stuff when you can just do it on your credit card, pay that balance off every month and move on forward? Or use your Bitcoin or other things to do things. So I think we're just seeing a fundamental shift in how the economy is working.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's an evolution, but I think it's important that the public have an opportunity to engage in exchanges where the government isn't necessarily going to be able to track everything you're doing, and cash is one way of doing it. So it makes me nervous to think that we're going to not have cash someday, and I don't know if we'd ever get to that point. But
it's being floated in Washington. Leading economists are saying this would be a good thing. It'll get rid of the black market. It'll make tax evasion more difficult, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Well, see, I'm a libertarian now, so I see a lot of that as a plus.
Exactly.
And so it makes me nervous to think that we're going to go to a system. I mean, some electronic systems are difficult to track, but some aren't. So they're probably going to try to force everybody into a system where they can more easily track what people are doing, and I think that's dangerous. I mean, I think there should be ways for people to exchange without being tracked by government. And I mean, let's face it, the black market, the underground economy, kept the Soviet Union alive. So there's times when you want to be able to get around government rules, and I think the same thing applies in America as well as the former Soviet Union.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. Consumer spending has held up, even though the labor force participation rate keeps going down. There's got to be something going on there.
Something's going on.
One more topic. This is kind of a fun one. It's Jesse Ventura making noises about running for the Libertarian Party nomination. I'm pretty sure that Gary Johnson is going to be running again. He's the former governor of New Mexico who won the nomination last time. If we end up with a battle of the royals, and I'm talking about the Bush family versus the Clinton family, or alternatively, if we end up with competing economic populists, Trump versus Sanders, is the 2016 election the window in which the Libertarian candidate, either Jesse or Gary Johnson, would be able to make an impact?
Could we have Jesse Ventura, Donald Trump, and Hillary Clinton in a cage match in a wrestling arena? Now, that I would pay good money to watch. And the winner becomes president. How about going that route? Well, I mean, I think this is a time when people are paying attention to libertarian, conventional, traditional libertarian positions, such as, immigration. I mean, that's a huge issue right now internationally.
And Hillary's gotten herself on the right side on that issue, interestingly.
Right, and a lot of these cuts across party. And also military, we were just talking about military intervention. So I think people are, considering alternatives right now, and I think they should look seriously at Gary Johnson, who at this point is a very experienced politician. I mean, former governor and run for president before, and has a lot of good things to say on these issues.
Well, Jesse's a former governor, and
right, my home state of
president too.
My home state of Minnesota. The problem with Jesse, though, is he wanted to fight with everybody. I mean, he didn't pick the right moments to engage in battles. He saw the media as his enemy constantly, rather than seeing them as a conduit to get his message out. And I think he just fought with everybody too much, and eventually wasn't taken seriously. So I don't think he'd be the best candidate. I think Gary would make a better candidate.
So you think that's probably what will happen in the LP? Now let's assume that Gary does run, and I'm sure he will, and he'll probably get the nomination. Will there be a chance for a Libertarian Party breakout at the presidential level? I'm not talking about a win necessarily, but a double-digit showing, let's say. Enough to get into the debates.
I don't know.
It depends on, again, it depends on who the Republican nominee is, too. Throw that into the mix, you get a Rand Paul out there that
Well, that would probably, that would not make it happen. That would make it not happen.
You would take a lot of the air out of the room at that point in time. So there's a lot of dynamic that goes on, and again, this is still really early on in the process.
But fun to speculate.
It is.
That's the show. We'll see you again next week, same time, same place, on the Libertarian Counterpoint on YouTube, on Channel 17 in Sacramento, on the internet at www.accesssacramento.org at 8 p.m. Thursdays, noon Fridays, and 4 a.m. Saturdays, all Pacific time. Thank you very much for being part of the show. See you again next week.